Naomi Carter is a young woman of determination and ambition. At just 28 years old, she has built a solid reputation in the tech industry, becoming the CEO of a rapidly growing startup. Despite coming from a well-established family, Naomi has never relied on her father, Michael Carter, the CEO of one of the world's largest aviation corporations. Instead, she has always strived to make her own way, building her career through sheer talent and intelligence. As a Black woman in the fiercely competitive business world, Naomi has faced numerous challenges and prejudices. She is well aware of the skeptical looks she receives when walking into boardrooms and the judgmental glances at major corporate events. But rather than letting these obstacles hold her back, Naomi has used them as fuel to push forward. She has a clear vision, an unyielding will, and an unwavering refusal to accept failure. Because of this, in just 6 years, she has transformed her company from a small startup into one of the most promising tech firms, attracting the attention of major investors. This flight to Dubai carries enormous significance for Naomi. She is about to meet with a multinational corporation to finalize a multi-million-dollar deal, which could expand her company into the global market. To ensure maximum comfort and focus for the upcoming negotiations, Naomi has booked a first-class seat, partly as a well-earned reward for her relentless hard work. However, no amount of preparation could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. This flight would soon turn into the worst nightmare of her life. On her way to the airport, Naomi felt excited and confident. She had traveled internationally countless times and was familiar with every procedure. She dressed elegantly, but without ostentation, a sleek black designer suit paired with sophisticated heels. Her sharp eyes, radiant brown skin, and neatly tied back black hair completed the image of a powerful businesswoman. Naomi entered the airport with a professional demeanor, ready for her journey. But in just a few minutes, her life would be thrown into a storm she never saw coming. Stepping past the check-in area, Naomi Carter took a deep breath, absorbing the bustling atmosphere of JFK International Airport. Everything was going smoothly. She was well accustomed to the routine, waiting in line, presenting her ticket, passport check. This was supposed to be just a simple formality before she enjoyed her first-class flight to Dubai. But the moment she reached the check-in counter, she sensed that something was off. Standing before her was a Vanessa Monroe, a 35-year-old senior flight attendant, a tall woman with blonde hair neatly tied back, wearing a perfectly pressed navy blue uniform, exuding authority and absolute control. But there was something else about her, the cold, calculating look in her eyes, a stark contrast to the professional smiles typically offered by flight attendants. As Naomi handed over her ticket, Vanessa glanced at her briefly, then suddenly narrowed her eyes as if assessing her from head to toe. Naomi felt a momentary hesitation from Vanessa. She had seen that look before, the look of someone who believed she didn't belong here. First class? A young Black woman, traveling alone, on a flight to Dubai? To Vanessa, that image didn't fit what she believed was right. Vanessa scanned the ticket with an air of reluctance, her expression unreadable. Then, instead of handing it back as usual, she frowned, typed a few keys on the computer, and abruptly looked up, her voice cold. "I'm sorry, there's an issue with your ticket. I don't see your name in the system." Naomi blinked, momentarily surprised. She quickly composed herself, keeping her voice calm yet firm. "There must be a mistake. I booked this ticket 2 weeks ago and received a confirmation email." She raised her phone, displaying the email, but Vanessa didn't even glance at the screen. Instead, she arched an eyebrow, folded her arms, and adopted a challenging stance. "Could you step aside? I need to assist the next passenger." Naomi tightened her grip around her phone. She wasn't someone who caused trouble. She had encountered situations like this before, suspicious mistakes that always seemed to happen to a certain type of person. But today, she didn't have time for patience. "I'm not going anywhere," Naomi said, her voice low but sharp. "I paid for this ticket, and I will be on this flight. If there's an issue, I want to speak to your manager." Passengers nearby began to take notice, a few turning to look. Vanessa realized this, But rather than handling the situation professionally, she switched tactics, opting for a direct attack. "Are you sure you know how to book a flight?" Vanessa said with a mocking smirk, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "I've seen this before. Wrong date, misspelled name, and then blaming the staff." That wasn't a mistake. That was an insult. A deliberate way to suggest Naomi didn't belong here, that she wasn't qualified to fly first class. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, and a few even pulled out their phones to record. Naomi took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. She had dealt with people like Vanessa before, those who believed their tiny bit of power gave them the right to judge others. But this time, she wasn't going to let it slide. Naomi put away her phone, locked eyes with Vanessa, and spoke in a voice as sharp as a blade. "It looks like you're abusing your authority. I want you to check my ticket again, right now." Vanessa hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smirked, her expression dripping with condescension. "If you have a valid passport, I might reconsider." Naomi nodded, pulling out her passport, believing this would finally settle the issue. But she had no idea the real nightmare was only just beginning. Naomi pulled her passport from her handbag and handed it to Vanessa, her expression remaining calm, though a sinking feeling began to settle in her chest. She was no stranger to being suspected solely because of her skin color. But this was the first time she had felt tension this thick, this deliberate. Vanessa took the passport with exaggerated slowness, as if she were looking for something wrong. She flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing slightly, then suddenly, her eyes narrowed, as though she had just discovered something deeply alarming. Naomi watched Vanessa's face carefully, sensing a calculated hesitation. Then, after a tense pause, Vanessa's cold voice rang out, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "This passport doesn't look real." Naomi blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" she asked, her voice firm but controlled. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to a nearby airline employee, holding up the passport with a falsely serious expression. "Does this passport look off to you? I think it might be fake." The other employee looked caught off guard, hesitant, unsure of what to say. But before she could speak, Vanessa pressed forward, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Forgery is a federal crime, and it's my duty to ensure the safety of this flight." And then the unthinkable happened. Before Naomi could say another word, right before her eyes, Vanessa gripped the passport with both hands and tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper sliced through the already tense air, turning the entire check-in area into a stunned silence. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart skipped a beat, as if someone had just stripped away her entire identity and freedom in an instant. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some passengers covered their mouths in shock, while others stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Vanessa, completely unfazed, tossed the two torn halves onto the counter, as if discarding a worthless scrap of paper. "Forgery is a serious offense," she declared with a tone of absolute authority. "You could be arrested for this." Naomi's ears rang. This was her real passport, a legitimate government-issued document. And this woman had just destroyed it like trash. Naomi wasn't someone who shocked easily. She had faced discrimination, doubt, and resistance all her life. But this was pure, unfiltered humiliation. Everything had happened so fast that she hadn't even processed it yet. Was she supposed to be angry, horrified, devastated? Then suddenly, the murmurs in the crowd escalated into outrage. A middle-aged man standing behind Naomi in line spoke up. "I saw her passport. It was completely valid." A woman nearby nodded in agreement, her eyes blazing with anger as she turned to Vanessa. Did she just tear up a passenger's passport? Is that even legal? More passengers pulled out their phones, some even going live, broadcasting the scene to the world. Naomi stood still for a few seconds, forcing herself to breathe, to think. She knew she couldn't afford to lose her composure. If she reacted too strongly, they would have an excuse to call security and claim she was causing a disturbance. If she raised her voice, she would be labeled as an angry Black woman losing control. She couldn't let that happen. Naomi took a deep, steady breath, clenched her fists, and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts and dialed a number, one that could turn the situation around in an instant. 2 rings. Then a familiar voice answered. Dad, I need you to come to JFK right now. The lead flight attendant just tore up my passport and accused me of a crime. Her voice was slow, deliberate, unwavering. Naomi had no idea that the real storm was only just beginning. Naomi clenched her phone tightly as the call with her father ended. She knew he wouldn't waste a second. But that didn't mean she could relax, because Vanessa still wasn't done. Looking down at the shredded remains of her passport on the counter, a wave of fury surged in Naomi's chest. This was no longer a mistake or incompetence. This was deliberate, a blatant abuse of power. But before she could voice her protest, Vanessa struck first. With a mockingly composed yet venomous tone, Vanessa shrugged, raising her voice just enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. Well, I think everything is clear now. A fake passport, a ticket that's not in our system. Looks like we've got a serious situation here. Naomi narrowed her eyes. What exactly are you implying? Vanessa let out a cold smirk, folding her arms. You know, cases like this, they're often linked to illegal activities. A thick silence filled the air. A few passengers gasped in surprise, some instinctively stepping back, as if Naomi had suddenly become a threat. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle yet unmistakable weight of suspicion. Just minutes ago, these same people had witnessed the unjust destruction of her passport. But now a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was spreading. Vanessa wasn't finished. She tilted her chin toward a group of airport security officers standing nearby. We need to search her luggage immediately. Passengers with forged documents often carry other suspicious items. Naomi froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Vanessa wasn't just humiliating her. She was trying to frame her. Are you accusing me of being a criminal? Naomi's voice was no longer calm. It was icy and sharp. I didn't say that, Vanessa said, feigning innocence. But her tone had already done its damage. It had planted just enough uncertainty in the minds of the onlookers. Naomi glanced around. Some passengers had already changed their demeanor. At first, they had been angry on her behalf. But now, with Vanessa's careful manipulation, some had started to hesitate. Naomi felt the fury in her chest deepen. This was how people like Vanessa operated. They didn't need proof. They didn't need logic. They just needed to sow doubt and let fear do the rest. One of the security officers started approaching. Naomi saw his hand move toward his radio. If they detained her now, if they dragged her into a back room with no evidence, she would be held for hours, maybe even longer. Her multi-million-dollar deal in Dubai? Gone. Her reputation? Forever tainted. She couldn't let that happen. Naomi took a step forward, her gaze locked onto Vanessa, her voice low but commanding. You just made a very serious mistake. Vanessa stiffened, clearly not expecting Naomi to stand her ground. But before she could retaliate, a voice boomed over the airport's intercom system. All security personnel at Gate B7, stand down immediately. Directive from senior management. Vanessa froze. Naomi knew exactly what was happening. She turned back to Vanessa, her expression unreadable, and said, My father just arrived. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of someone who had just flipped the entire game. Vanessa's face drained of color. She turned, and there he was. Michael Carter, CEO of one of the world's largest airlines, walked into the check-in area, followed by a team of executives in impeccably tailored suits. Naomi remained still, waiting. This time, she wouldn't be the one bowing her head. The arrival of Michael Carter, CEO of the airline and Naomi's father, completely shifted the atmosphere at the airport. The check-in area, which had been filled with hushed murmurs, recording phones, and a mix of outrage and suspicion, fell into absolute silence as the powerful man walked in. Michael didn't need to speak right away. Clad in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his demeanor was calm yet commanding. The airport staff, including Vanessa, froze upon recognizing him. Some straightened their postures immediately, while others instinctively stepped aside, knowing that the situation had spiraled beyond their control. Naomi remained still, arms crossed, her gaze never leaving Vanessa. She didn't need to explain herself. She didn't need to plead for her father's help. The evidence was there. The entire incident had been recorded. And Vanessa would answer for what she had done. Michael approached Naomi first, his sharp eyes scanning his daughter, checking to see if she was okay. Naomi gave him a slight nod. She wasn't the type to let anger cloud her judgment. But this time she needed to see justice served. Then Michael turned to Vanessa. "You're Vanessa Monroe?" His voice was calm, but its weight was undeniable. Vanessa, now completely stripped of her earlier confidence, swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I was simply following security procedures." Michael raised a hand, silencing her instantly. "Following security procedures?" His brow arched, his gaze piercing. "Are you referring to the procedure where you tore up a passenger's passport without any proof? Or the one where you falsely accused my daughter of a crime in front of hundreds of witnesses?" Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came out. She knew she was caught. Michael turned to a higher-ranking airport official who had been silently observing the chaos. "I want access to every security camera in this terminal, right now." The official nodded frantically and rushed off. This wasn't a request. It was an order. Michael's gaze returned to Vanessa, this time ice cold. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Vanessa took a shaky step back, now genuinely panicking. "Mr. Carter, I was only..." "You didn't just violate this airline's policies." Michael cut her off, his voice now razor sharp. "You broke the law. Destroying a valid U.S. passport is a federal offense. Not only will you lose your job, but you could face criminal charges." A security officer stepped forward, receiving instructions through his earpiece. "We've reviewed the footage," he reported. "The evidence is undeniable. We need to take Miss Spy Monroe into custody for further investigation." Vanessa's face turned ashen white. She looked around, desperately searching for someone to defend her, but no one did. The other airline employees, who might have sided with her earlier, now averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. Naomi finally took a step forward, speaking for the first time since her father had arrived. "You thought I wouldn't fight back, didn't you?" Her voice was calm, precise, but each word cut like a blade. "You thought I was just another passenger you could humiliate, someone you could abuse your power over." Vanessa hung her head, speechless. "But you made a mistake," Naomi continued, her tone not filled with anger, but with absolute certainty. "You underestimated the wrong person." Right then, the security officer reached for Vanessa's arm. "Miss Monroe, you need to come with us. Now." Vanessa truly panicked this time, but there was no escape left. She had dug her own grave. Naomi watched as Vanessa was escorted away, but she didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. Michael turned back to Naomi, pride flickering in his eyes. "You handled that well," he said, his voice low but firm. "But this isn't over yet. We need to ensure she's held accountable all the way." Naomi nodded. "I don't just want her fired. I want to sue this airline for systemic discrimination." Michael smirked, a knowing, approving smirk. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." Naomi took a deep breath, knowing that this wasn't just a personal battle. This would be the fight that changed the entire airline industry. As Vanessa was led away, Naomi remained still, her eyes fixed on the once arrogant woman who now trembled, stripped of every ounce of power she once wielded. Vanessa had believed she could walk away from this, that her manipulation and authority as a senior flight attendant would crush a passenger like Naomi. But now, the very system she had exploited had turned against her. Michael Carter, calm yet commanding, turned to the airport's senior staff member, his gaze sharp. "I want a full review of every passenger complaint against Miss Monroe during her time here." A tense-looking employee rushed forward, a tablet in hand, his face visibly troubled. "Mr. Carter, we just found some disturbing internal emails." Michael scanned the screen, his expression growing colder with every word. The emails exposed Vanessa's directives. She had been ordering flight attendants to quietly reject passengers who didn't fit the image of first class, subtly filtering out those who didn't look the part. Naomi felt her stomach tighten as she read it. This wasn't just one woman's prejudice. This was a systemic practice deliberately upheld. Before anyone could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. "I have more evidence." Heads turned. Naomi instantly recognized the man stepping forward. Jonathan Pierce, the former executive director of the airline. He held up a USB drive, his eyes sharp with meaning. "I knew this day would come," he said. "I just didn't expect it to explode like this." Jonathan plugged the USB into the senior staff member's tablet. A video appeared on the screen, a hidden recording from the flight attendant's lounge. Vanessa stood, speaking to a colleague, a smirk of disdain curling on her lips. "She really thinks she belongs in first class?" "Who?" her colleague asked. Vanessa, her eyes narrowing with contempt. "Them. The ones who try to prove themselves with money. They book first class just to make a statement, but we all know they don't belong there." The other attendant hesitated. "But they paid for their tickets," Vanessa chuckled coldly. "I don't care how much they paid. If I can find a way to get them off without a lawsuit, I will." The screen went dark, but the air remained suffocatingly tense. Naomi saw mouths hanging open. Some employees stood frozen, as if unable to process what they had just witnessed. But Naomi wasn't surprised. This was just the truth she had always known. Michael turned to the senior executive, his voice like a blade against glass. "Do you realize that if this information goes public, your airline will face one of the largest lawsuits in history?" The executive swallowed hard, the weight of the situation sinking in. But no one could undo the fact that this system had protected people like Vanessa for far too long. Vanessa had completely unraveled. She shook her head rapidly, searching for a way out, for someone to defend her, but no one would. Two security officers approached, one placing a firm hand on her arm. "Miss Monroe, you need to come with us." Vanessa panicked, struggling. "No, you can't do this to me. I was just following procedure." But no one answered. She was dragged away, her screams fading into nothing. Naomi took a deep breath, steadying herself. She didn't feel joy or vindication. She just felt relief that justice had been served. But she also knew this wasn't over, because Vanessa wouldn't be the only one held accountable. This entire system was about to change, and Naomi would make sure of it. Naomi stood in the middle of the airport, watching everything that had just unfolded. Yet she felt no sense of triumph. Vanessa had been taken away, and the senior executives were in disarray, realizing the gravity of the situation. But Naomi knew this wasn't over. This wasn't just about one power-hungry flight attendant abusing her position. It was about an entire system that had allowed this kind of injustice to happen over and over again. If she hadn't been the daughter of the CEO, if help hadn't arrived in time, she could have been trapped in a situation with no way out. But not everyone had that privilege, and she wouldn't let this happen to anyone else. She turned to Michael Carter, who stood beside her with a calm yet pensive look in his eyes. He didn't say anything. He was waiting for Naomi to make her own decision. Naomi took a deep breath, already knowing what she had to do. "I'm suing this airline." Her words were clear, firm, and unwavering, cutting through the air like a blade. Some employees nearby flinched, a few turning their heads in shock. The CEO's daughter suing his own company? But Michael wasn't surprised. He simply nodded, as though he had expected this. "Then do it right." Naomi didn't hesitate. She turned to her trusted assistant, her voice sharp, decisive. "Contact our legal team. Want this lawsuit filed as soon as possible." The assistant nodded and hurried away. This wasn't just about Vanessa. Naomi wanted the entire system to be held accountable, and she had all the evidence she needed. Footage from passengers, recording Vanessa tearing up her passport. Security camera footage, documenting everything that had transpired. Internal emails, proving this wasn't just one rogue employee, but a systemic, discriminatory practice. Naomi wasn't just fighting for herself. She was about to force an industry-wide reckoning. Less than an hour later, the video of Naomi being humiliated at the check-in counter had flooded social media. The hashtag Justice for Naomi skyrocketed to the top of global trends. Major news outlets, CNN, BBC, Forbes, The New York Times, picked up the story, analyzing her upcoming lawsuit and the potential ramifications for the airline industry. That evening, Naomi accepted an invitation for a live television interview on national TV. The host looked at her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Miss Carter, your lawsuit against this airline has ignited a massive public response. Could you share why you decided to pursue legal action instead of letting the situation fade away? Naomi held her gaze steady, her voice unwavering. Because I'm not the only victim. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the minds of millions watching. I have a voice. I have the resources to fight back. But how many others have been unfairly turned away? How many passengers have been treated like suspects simply because of their skin color? How many people have suffered in silence because they had no way to defend themselves? The studio fell silent. Naomi turned her eyes directly to the camera, speaking to every person watching. I don't want this to be just about my story. I want to make sure no one else has to go through this again. This isn't just about me. This is about justice for everyone. Naomi's lawsuit sent the airline stock price into freefall. Shareholders applied intense pressure, customers boycotted in droves, and the media relentlessly covered the scandal. The executive board convened an emergency meeting. Some leaders pleaded with Michael Carter to step in and de-escalate the crisis. Mr. Carter, this is your daughter. If this lawsuit continues, the airline's reputation will be completely destroyed. A senior executive spoke, his forehead slick with nervous sweat. Michael didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his gaze piercing as he stared at the man who had just spoken. Then why didn't any of you think about that before allowing people like Vanessa Monroe to operate unchecked? The room fell into absolute silence. The 6-month legal battle had finally reached its conclusion. Throughout the lawsuit, Naomi and her legal team not only exposed Vanessa's misconduct, but also uncovered a deliberate system of discrimination within the airline. Internal documents, leaked emails, and video evidence proved that Vanessa wasn't just an isolated case, she was merely a symptom of a much larger problem. On the day of the verdict, hundreds of reporters gathered outside the courthouse, ready to cover a case that could reshape the airline industry. As the judge spoke, the courtroom fell silent, everyone holding their breath. After reviewing all evidence, this court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Naomi Carter. A wave of applause erupted from Naomi's supporters. Online, justice for Naomi once again dominated global trends. The airline was fined $10 million for severe violations of civil rights and discriminatory practices. But this wasn't just a financial penalty. The court also mandated a complete overhaul of employee training and policies to ensure this never happened again. Naomi hadn't just won justice for herself, she had set a new precedent for the entire service industry. As for Vanessa Monroe, she was permanently banned from working in the airline industry. No airline would dare hire her, and her name became synonymous with abuse of power and discrimination. The media didn't speak of Vanessa Monroe as a once powerful flight attendant anymore. She was now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a disgrace in aviation history. But the impact of the lawsuit stretched far beyond Michael Carter's airline. The shockwaves rippled across the global airline industry. Other airlines scrambled to review their internal policies, and several executives launched anti-discrimination initiatives to avoid becoming the next scandal. Airline employees began speaking out, exposing years of injustice they had either witnessed or endured in silence. Naomi had ignited a revolution. Yet, even in victory, Naomi didn't see this as the end. To her, this was only the beginning of a much larger fight. As she stepped out of the courthouse, surrounded by flashing cameras, she held her head high, her eyes burning with determination. She wasn't just the woman who won a lawsuit, she was the woman who changed an entire system. But this wasn't the finish line. Naomi knew that justice couldn't stop at just one case. She had won, But there were still countless others facing the same injustices, with no voice to fight back. And she wouldn't stop until every single one of them had a chance at fairness. Naomi Carter, once a passenger denied her rights, now a symbol of change. Naomi Carter's story is not just a lawsuit or a personal battle. It is a powerful reminder that injustice still exists in our society. How many times have you witnessed or experienced discrimination but felt powerless to speak up? How many people have been overlooked, dismissed, or denied opportunities simply because they didn't fit some invisible, arbitrary standard? Naomi wasn't the first to face this kind of situation, but she chose to fight instead of accept it. Her journey proves that when you have the courage to stand up, you don't just change your own fate, you can change an entire system. Justice isn't just delivered in courtrooms, it comes from those who refuse to stay silent in the face of inequality. Today, it was Naomi. Tomorrow, it could be you. You may not have had your passport torn apart, but perhaps you've been judged for not fitting a mold. You may not have been wrongfully accused, but maybe you've been treated unfairly with no one to defend you. Naomi didn't wait for someone else to fight for her. She did it herself. And if there's one lesson to take from this story, it's this: never stay silent in the face of injustice. The world only changes when people are brave enough to challenge it. Are you ready to be that person?